side door here.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. I'm
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again for letting this happen. It means a lot. Yes, sir. We're gonna be right here, right next to you. Okay. Both people? Both people.
Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. When through the woods and forest glades I wander, and hear the birds sing sweetly in the trees, when I look down from lofty mountain grandeur, and hear the brook, and feel the gentle breeze, then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. How great thou art. And when I think that God his Son not sparing sent him to die, I scarce can take it in, that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, he bled and died to take away my sin. When Christ shall come with shout of acclamation and take me home, what joy shall fill my heart? Then I shall bow in humble adoration
I'm going to stay down if I'm not trying to throw anybody off here, but I'll stay on the floor for this. It's so good to have you here today. I am certainly excited about what we're going to hear. This assembly has been anticipated now for, like 3 days, okay? Almost a week. We did not know that we were going to be able to have Charlie Kirk until last week, and we began making those arrangements, and we're certainly happy that it worked out. Let's ask the Lord to pray. This is an assembly, but we want His blessing upon what we do today. Father, thank you so much for your greatness. We know you as a great God and a good God. I pray that you would use this time to allow us that know you to, like the Bereans did with the Word of God, I pray that we would check out whether these things be so today as we see the applications of biblical truth to real life. I pray that you would help us to make biblical decisions about elections and about support for causes. I pray, Father, we would always please you with what we do. And to this end, we ask this assembly time would work to make us more like you. Give us the mind, I pray, that Jesus would have. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. I have to keep this. I'm used to one of these things around. Okay, we do have some folks visiting with us, but before we do that, let me say that we have recently had students begin a Turning Point USA chapter here at Maranatha, and the leaders are sitting up here in the front with us, and I'm going to ask them to stand. President Julia Wall, and then Victoria Graham and Jonathan Spate as cabinet members. Of course, there are other members there, and they have really spearheaded this and arranged this. Let's give them a hand for that. Thank you. All right, and then up here in the front, we have a couple of dignitaries that we do not want to miss letting you know about them, all right? Scott Fitzgerald is a senator, state senator here, and he's running for Jim Sensenbrenner's seat in Congress. Congressman Sensenbrenner represented us for a long time. I think redistricting had something to do with some things along the way, but he told me personally when he visited campus, been here a number of times, that Maranatha was responsible for getting him elected. I mean, that's a big statement. And he was the longest serving representative in Congress. He's retiring now this year. So that goes back a ways when he was first elected, but the support of conservative Christians was important to his election. And I trust that you recognize how important it is for you to vote and to vote wisely. Sir, please stand for us. Let's give him a hand for being here. All right? Thank you. Who is that masked man? John Jagler, if you'd stand up for us, sir. Watertown resident, and he represents us in the assembly here in Wisconsin. And I want to say this to him. I want to thank him publicly for being very responsive to the needs of higher education as it pertains to Maranatha. He has facilitated, he's done work for us, and we appreciate it so much. The first time we met was in my office, and we prayed that God would have his will in the first election, and we trust that God will continue to lead in your service for our state. Let's give him a hand as well. Now, I will say that there's a special introduction that Turning Point has for our speaker today. And they will be playing that right before their live stream begins, going out across the country, I guess, and a number of different venues. But I'd like to give my own introduction, if I could, for our speaker, Charlie Kirk. I'm reading from his bio slightly, but little tweaks here and there, things I know. He's in 2,000 high school and colleges with Turning Point USA, not a small feat. He has the largest, fastest growing conservative youth organization in the country. He was been named to Forbes 30 under 30 list. That is an accomplishment. He was the youngest speaker at the 2016 Republican National Convention. I don't know this as a fact, but I think he would have been the youngest speaker this year if he hadn't have been the youngest speaker 4 years ago. Okay, that kind of makes it hard to be the youngest. And then he has 2 books. One of them is a bestseller, MAGA Doctrine, the only ideas that will win the future. And so, #1 bestseller, you should have that. Over 100 million people per month connect with Charlie's social media, and he's been named one of the 10 most engaged Twitter handles in the world. Wow. Who do you think #1 is, by the way? All right. Not to say. All right. Okay. He has the Charlie Kirk Show. He regularly ranks among the 15 top news shows on Apple podcast charts. He's here, and he's going to give us an analysis of modern political and cultural landscape. And he has regularly done interviews with some of the most influential people of our time. So he's well respected in many venues. Someone says, well, what's the purpose here? Well, Maranatha is a university, and this is part of your educational experience, and I hope that you will recognize that. To say that we are not trying to influence you for conservative, biblical application of truth would be wrong. We make no apology for that. And we trust that today you're going to be convinced why you should vote for candidates that are pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, self-defense, candidates that are going to be for free market economics. And we could go on. And these are the principles that you're going to hear about today. You're going to have a question time, answer time. Answers come up from up here, not down here, by the way. Question time, and at the end of this, and we'll know that he'll be staying just a little while for pictures afterwards. And all that being said, let's do a welcome before they do their intro, okay? Let's give our Maranatha welcome to Charlie Kirk.
Welcome to Turning Point Action's proudly hosted 2020 event, the 4-4 Tour. Joining us on stage tonight, Charlie Kirk. We are proud to be here in Watertown, Wisconsin. Let's get this started. Now, welcoming to the stage, Charlie Kirk.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you. And we've been crisscrossing the country, going from Florida to Texas, back to Arizona tonight. And we got a wonderful invite to come here to Wisconsin. And I couldn't say no. I actually grew up right across the border in northern Illinois, Wheeling, Arlington Heights area. I'm sure some people are from there originally. The fun thing about being from Illinois is we have term limits in Illinois. It's a little different than most states, though. It's 1 term in office, 1 term in jail. So when we ask for our governor's cell number, we actually mean his... I got one more, and then I'm done. My grandmother was a lifelong Republican. She passed away in the mid-1990s, and she's been voting Democrat ever since. So, all right, that's enough Illinois jokes. No, it's great to be here. I actually got my political start in this state back in 2012. I came up here and actually helped support Governor Scott Walker defeat the recall effort. You guys remember that. A little bit of enthusiasm around that. And I've always loved this state. It really is what makes America the greatest country in the history of the world. It is the backbone of our country. It is hardworking, family-centric, people of faith. And it's great to be here at MBU. And actually, I was most excited about this, not just to discuss current events, which we'll do, but actually to also discuss the intersection of my faith with why I do what I do. And on the way up, I had a chance to read the statement of faith for this school and found very little that I disagree with theologically or otherwise. And so I think there's a lot of common ground that we all share here. So I'm a Bible-believing Christian. It's the most important thing in my life. Evangelical Christian. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. I believe in the triune God, in the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I believe Jesus Christ is the King of the world, and I believe that we are commanded as Christians to tell all people in all languages all across the planet the gospel, which literally means the good news. I go to college campuses, and usually when I say that, I get hisses and boos. So it's so refreshing just to be at a campus where actually people believe that. And on that note, I think this is like the second time I've ever been invited to speak at a college. I think Liberty and this school are the only time they actually invite me to speak. I speak all across the country, and usually we are the ones planning the events, trying to get ourselves to speak on campus. So it's really refreshing. So look, I am involved in the political space, do podcasting, radio every single day. And something that I just kind of want to put out there to think about is some Christians say, I don't like politics. That is something I don't want to get involved in. It doesn't affect me. I just care about the gospel. And I'm not diminishing the gospel, but I'll push back. I think that we as Christians are actually commanded to get involved in the political arena. All throughout the Old Testament, many people that are viewed favorably in the biblical narrative got involved in secular government, whether it be Daniel, Joseph, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, Esther, Mordecai. There are many examples of people of God that try to influence government for the good. Jesus Christ, when he went up to Caesarea Philippi with his disciples, all the pagan religions right near the mouth of the Jordan River, all their noise going nuts, Jesus Christ said, on this rock, and we say build the church, but you actually go to Tyndale's translation, the Koine Greek term was ekklesia. And ekklesia, if actually properly understood in its context, was what we're doing today. Ecclesia was a gathering of people to try to form civic government, to try to improve the condition of the world around you. Jesus did not use synagogue. He didn't use terms like temple. He used a secular term, I think, because Jesus did not want compartmentalized Christianity. He wanted comprehensive Christianity. Jesus did not want us to wall ourselves off and just have the good news and say this is for us and only us. And I perfectly admit that politics is messy. It can be a blood sport. But the church has had plenty of shortfalls in the last couple of decades, if we're honest with ourselves. Anything that involves human beings that are broken by nature is going to be flawed. And I don't think that's, I hear that excuse sometimes from believers. They're like, politics is too messy. I don't like it. It doesn't really resonate with me. Now, you might not like it, but if you don't get involved in politics, then people with other religions will. And I don't mean other religions that you might think traditionally. There is a growing atheistic religion in this country. And I actually take the view, not everyone will hold this view here, that atheism is a religion. They go about it with evangelistic fervor. They convert people very effectively. The belief in nothingness is something that is very tempting to a lot of young people. And so I've seen Bible-believing Christians raised in wonderful homes. They go off to secular universities, and within one semester, they believe in that there is no God, there is no creator, and this is all just an act of randomness. I have a lot of fun with atheists when I go to college campuses. I always say that without God, there would be no atheists, so that's kind of a good opening start. So, and look, I mean this, that there is really a theological debate happening in this country, whether we recognize it or not, and the real theological debate is who's in charge. And that's really the question, and whether we want to admit it or not, all of this is expressed in politics in one way or the other. And it's not perfect, right versus left, but there is a good fit at times of, do you believe that your rights come from God, or do you think that the rights come from government? That's really the basic conversation that we need to have in Western society. And this country, founded by evangelistic Baptist Protestant preachers in the 1730s in the First Great Awakening, which led to the Declaration of Independence, which was signed 51 to 55, it was signed by Bible-believing, regular church-attending Christians, recognized that our rights come from a sovereign God. It doesn't come from King George. Now, this is not a small conclusion. Most of human history completely struggled with this idea and rejected it. This idea that nobility, blood right means nothing. It's incredible that our country got this question correctly. And now, mind you, we got plenty of things that we had to reconcile throughout the many first decades of our country's history, but also this idea that we are founded simply and totally on slavery is also not true. In 1777, a year after the Declaration of Independence was signed, Vermont abolished slavery. In the U.S. Constitution, it says 20 years and we're going to abolish all these slaves into the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson, being a slave owner himself, signed the No New Slaves into the United States ban of 1807, import ban, one of the first countries ever besides the United Kingdom to abolish slavery in the entire planet. Connecticut, New York followed suit in the late 1780s, early 1790s, and George Washington, an Anglican Christian Bible believer, actually said no new slaves in the Northwest Territories of our country. So it's a lot more, let's just say, complicated than just what is being portrayed at times in the national narrative, that our country was simply and solely founded on an idea of total acceptance of slavery. It's just not true. In fact, the question should be, why did we abolish slavery and how did we abolish it? Not if we had slavery at all. Because every other country prior to the United States of America had slavery. They were proud of it. It was institutionalized. It was our country that disrupted that, and for good reason. And it's because you had Christians that started to pour into God's word and realized that those words, all men created equal, are not just a bumper sticker phrase. They had real significance and meaning. It was in this state in the 1860s that started the Republican Party. That was the anti-slavery party in Ripon, Wisconsin, in a church. It was Christians that led the abolitionist movement in this country. It was Christians that led the women's suffrage movement in this country. It was Christians that led the civil rights movement in this country. It's always been Christians contesting in the ecclesia, which Christ told us to do, to improve the world around us. And I get it. Some of you guys are like, it's just too divisive, it's too heated, it's all these sorts of things. I don't think that's a good excuse, though. That's the world. That's the world that we are called to get into. And that doesn't mean you should have to sacrifice your Christian faith or your biblical values, but it does mean that we that have the truth should be salt and light and contest in that public arena. That we should say that there's something wrong with 1 million abortions a year in our country every single year. That we should say there's something wrong, like in California, they pass SB 145 that decriminalizes pedophilia in the state of California. That's just wrong. And that we as Christians have a reason why that's wrong. And by the way, the reason that there's so much moral relativism happening in our country right now, where people are so confused, is because as soon as you remove God, right and wrong merely becomes an opinion. As soon as you remove a moral order, the secular atheists, the Sam Harris types, who have a great amount of respect for his intellect, not a lot of respect for his conclusions, they will argue that you can try to find objective morality in science. That is not true. You need to believe in a higher power for when you start to get right and wrong from. As soon as you remove that, you will then have some form of social Darwinism, and there will be no protection of the innocent or protection of the weak. For example, in our country, we take this for granted. How we take care of blind and deaf people in this country is amazing. A lot of the rest of the world disregard people with any form of learning disabilities, special education needs, blind or deaf difficulty. Why is it that the Western world started to care about blind people and deaf people? It was Christians that started the first academy for the blind in year 372 in Jerusalem. It was Christians that started to say every single person is made in the image of God, and we're going to care about people, not cast them aside, put them into the woods. How it worked in Greek and Roman times, if a baby was born with any sort of defect, any sort of learning disability, they would literally just walk them out in the woods, abandon them, and let the wolves or the cold, and that was it. When you have a belief that everyone's made in the image of God, all of a sudden you go out of your way to create systems and civil government to care for the least of these in society. That is a Christian ethic, everybody. In a secular world, there is no argument to care about people if you take the logical conclusion to its furthest possible extension. That's exactly why in Sweden they have abortions for people that have Down syndrome. They have the lowest rates of Down syndrome of people on the planet. I don't agree with that. I think that every person is uniquely made in the image of God. I think every single person deserves that sort of protection. And so, I think that we as Christians, I think there's a call to action for us. I think that we have to go deeper into learning exactly what we're up against, understanding postmodernism, understanding the ideas that are infecting the highest levels of our government and discourse. And of course, I have my own personal political opinions of where that leads you, and we could talk about that if you guys want. But more so than not, what bothers me is not how the Christian world has been too opinionated or not too opinionated, but too complacent. That's my biggest bother, is that Christians, and some Christians have very, very strong opinions on eschatology. And that's fine. We can get into pre-trib, premillennial. I think you guys are pre-trib, premillennial here, so we can all agree on that. But that's not an excuse for inaction, everybody. What I find is sometimes your eschatology turns into an excuse. That's not okay. If you think Jesus is coming next Thursday, that's great. The house is on fire. Let's get the kids out. How do you put out the fire? Because every single generation of the last 100 years has thought Jesus is coming in their lifetime. And maybe it's coming. Maybe he's coming tomorrow. Maybe he's coming this afternoon. However, that is not an excuse for inaction, everybody. It says in Jeremiah to care for the welfare for the nation of which you are in, to pray for the leaders in authority so you might live quiet and peaceful lives, as it says in 1 Timothy. And we as Christians have to realize that in the last 6 months, we've kind of had our teeth kicked in a little bit, where pastors are being arrested for holding church services smaller than this in California. My pastor, Rob McCoy, Thousand Oaks Calvary Chapel, who was in front of a judge 3 times, threatened with arrest, tens of thousands of dollars of fines, just because he wanted to have church. Meanwhile, the cannabis dispensary, abortion clinic, and BLM Incorporated is allowed to march through the streets. Home improvement store and liquor stores remain open, but they say church is not essential because they say it's contributing to the spread of the virus, where it is a 0.0001% death rate for the people under 30. And yet, why wouldn't Home Depot and Lowe's contribute to the spread of the virus? Why wouldn't the Lakers celebration, where the Lakers won the NBA Finals, they have 35,000 people in the streets, no social distancing, no masks, no police force, no one trying to enforce the fact that they're protesting, but the fact that you gather as believers, then they start to show up with the police. There's a very simple reason for this. As soon as you remove the church, you remove people's belief in God, their power grab becomes a lot easier. And this is tried and true throughout the last 100 years in world history, that if you remove people's yearning for a higher power and their connection to God, something will replace that. We have a God-sized hole in our heart, and they try their best to try to have government policy or utopian promises, but if you remove people gathering, the ecclesia, then all of a sudden government becomes a lot more important in people's lives. They took Easter and Palm Sunday from us, and yet they're still allowed to march through the streets with almost no reproach whatsoever. And if it's all about just slowing and stopping the spread, then be consistent. If it really is about that, then shut down all of the gatherings of people throughout the major cities in this country. And the reason they have not done that is because, unfortunately, in my opinion, is too many churches went along with this for way too long. Is that too many Christians allowed themselves to be labeled as non-essential. If we're honest with ourselves, there's nothing more essential than church. There's nothing more essential than salvation. And we as Christians, and some people say, well, what about Romans 13? Romans 13 is the longest political passage in the New Testament written by Paul. And people say it says to submit to all rulers and leaders in authority. You're exactly right. Who's in charge in this country? We are. We're the sovereign. In a constitutional republic, the people are the sovereign. You don't have King Nero or Diocletian. You don't have Stalin or Mao. In this system, we are actually the sovereign. So when our natural rights are violated, it completely shows that in Romans 13, we are actually the ones that are being abused by the tyrant. And it says that very clearly in Romans 13. So I think we as Christians actually have a wake-up call right now. Because if you have seen in the last couple months, in my opinion, the greatest erosion of religious liberty in our country's history, where we have seen depression, suicide, alcoholism, social isolation, job loss, who's supposed to address those issues more than anything else? The churches, not government, not Netflix, not the 6-second TikTok videos. That's all a bunch of nonsense. You take away the church, don't be surprised when all of a sudden everything else starts to fall apart. The church built this country. The church is the fabric of this country. And I think that we as Christians and believers have to start to really practice what we believe. That we do believe that Jesus Christ is the King of the church. We do believe that Christians founded and started this country. And the moral order goes as follows. We have a vertical relationship in this country. That being first and foremost to God Almighty. And when you start to look around and you see the impartial, hypocritical, double standard enforcement against believers, then I think we have a right to push back against that. And so even going forward for a lot of the young people in this audience, we also have to be very serious about what type of country do we want to live in. I'm not even going to talk politically. You guys can ask questions about that. But I think it's actually more interesting just to talk philosophically and talking deeper into the ideas. What we are seeing in our country, as I mentioned, is evangelistic atheism, is the rise of secular governance, and with it, people that are more confused and more miserable than any other time in human history. Our generation, everybody, I'm 27, some of you guys are just a couple years younger than me, is the most miserable generation in American history. Why? We have access to more stuff, more information, more instant gratification than any other generation in the history of the planet. Yet we're the most depressed, most suicidal, least married, most single, most indulgent in alcoholism and drugs in American history. What's going on? The reason is this, is that liberty is very, very hard if you don't have a moral backstop. Liberty instantaneously becomes slavery if you don't know how to deal with it. Let me prove it to you. If you do not know how to control yourself with a supercomputer in your right-hand pocket called an iPhone, you'll soon become a slave to that iPhone or that supercomputer. That's why in Galatians 3 it says the law is a school teacher to Christ. that I think a misteaching that happens sometimes in some of the bigger churches is they say the law is there to show that we can't keep it and therefore we need Christ. That is not incorrect, but it's incomplete. The law is also there to point us to Christ. It shows us that Christ fulfilled the law of the prophets. And so when you look at this broken and secular world and people say you can do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, and you're going to be happy, and you play that out over a couple generations, you start to see all of a sudden that if you do not have the correct moral teaching, then all of a sudden that liberty soon becomes a form of slavery. That's exactly what's happening in our country right now. Despite the abundance, despite the multitude of options, you have young people that are on pace to have 500,000 less children next year than this year. 1 out of 4 of young people in our generation have contemplated suicide, and we shut down our country and we acted as if every single person would be perfectly fine or better on the backside of it. More young people committed suicide in the state of California than died of the Chinese coronavirus. That should really make a big pause to everyone and say, what exactly are we doing here? And the answer should be this. For we as Christians, it is the greatest evangelistic opportunity in the history of the planet. People are more broken, more suffering, and more searching for meaning. We on the Charlie Kirk Show, we talk about the gospel at least once a week. We are political in nature, and it's not incongruent or inconsistent with my biblical beliefs. And we are bringing people to Christ because they are starting to realize that people are standing up for something right now. That people in the secular or in the non-Christian world, they're looking at every single one of us. And when they see churches closed, they see Christians afraid, they lose respect for all of Christianity. Because if we do not have the boldness that we say we have because we're born new in Jesus Christ to the world that is looking for leadership and looking for courage, why should we ask them to believe what we believe if we ourselves are not full of courage and boldness in these very important and troubling and trying times? And I'll leave with this, and then we'll do some questions, which is the most important thing, which is the most fun thing I should say. Young people, just students, ask yourself what kind of country you want to live in, because that's really what's happening in these next 10 days. Do you want to live in a country where you blame other people for your problems? Do you want to live in a country where we teach young people that you're great and America is awful? Or do you want to live in a country where we tell young people, like, you have work to do, but America is actually a pretty good country? That's a really important question, because we used to tell young people in the 1970s and 80s, you got a lot of work to do, but this country is actually pretty amazing. Now we tell young people the exact opposite. You're perfect the way you are, but this place has got a lot of problems. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the self-esteem movement, which I have so many problems with, I could go on. I could do a whole hour speech on the self-esteem movement. I never liked the self-esteem movement. When I was in 7th grade, they had these big posters with these yellow smiley faces. You're perfect the way you are. I said, then why am I in school? I don't understand. Like, it never made any sense to me. It's like, if I don't need to improve, why am I here? And it puts an unneeded amount of pressure on young people to then live up to a standard that they know they cannot achieve. Instead, the poster should be, you're not all that you could be yet, but let's get you there. Like, that's it's probably too wordy, but you can wordsmith it later, right? But something like that, right? Instead of like, and I get it's well-intentioned, right? The intention is to teach self-esteem, that young people start to think higher of themselves. Young people will think higher of themselves if you teach self-control, not self-esteem. Self-control is the most missing thing in a young person's life right now, is that if you do not have self-control, especially in this world where it's easier to sin than ever before, you have a supercomputer where you can do anything you want at any time, then you'll soon live in kind of, I think, an endless tornado of misery. So let's do some questions if that's okay. I think that's the most fun, and I think we have about 25 or 30 minutes. So I want to thank you guys again for having me. So let's do some questions. I think we can do a line here, or I'm not sure the method, so I think we just do a line and we'll get to as many as we can. So.
Corona, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so I was reading in The Atlantic last night in preparation for Judge Barrett's confirmation today, and it was written by a liberal legal scholar, and it was a pretty good assessment for someone on the left, because they were talking about ever since the war in court how liberals and progressives have really used the court as their own tool to advance their own belief system on the country, judicial legislation and whatever. And then they said with the rightward shift to the court under Rehnquist and then Roberts, and especially now during Trump, that liberals and progressives are trying to figure out what to do because they can't legislate from the bench anymore. Obviously, we've seen the power grabs like you're saying. Where do you think the progressive movement, what instrument of government do you think they will try to hijack now that they're losing the court, and why?
It's a great question. Thank you. Very thoughtful. So first of all, I think they're going to try to add seats to the U.S. Supreme Court. They've said that. They're going to try to pack the U.S. Supreme Court. That's why they put up kind of a fake fight against Amy Coney Barrett. They gave some speeches. They did some things. You guys remember back to Brett Kavanaugh when we were literally discussing high school yearbooks? Like, oh no, on May 17th, 1982, I was here. It's just not just yearbooks, like calendars. They put up such a vicious fight against an innocent man because it was politically helpful for them at the time. They realize that Amy Coney Barrett is exceptionally well qualified, that she's unbelievably well versed in the country. Instead, they're making a strategic decision to try and say, we're going to lose this Amy Coney Barrett fight because we don't have the votes. We're going to try to win back the Senate, then we're going to add seats to the U.S. Supreme Court and court pack. I think that the American left, though, has made a different decision structurally. I think their new focus is to take over corporations, not just the instruments of government. And that's a very new realization for those of us that are conservatives, because for those of us that are conservatives, we've always thought of corporations as kind of being on team right. You know, big company, they like free enterprise. That is not the case anymore. You see this with some of the biggest tech companies. You see this with some of the mass distribution companies, that instead of trying to take over another agency of government, they're going to try to take over a $1 trillion company like Google, and they already have. So that's a deeper, more complex point that I'm happy to build out. But to kind of get back to your Amy Coney Barrett question, she is so incredibly well qualified. God willing, we'll be able to repeal the unconstitutional and immoral decision of Roe versus Wade, which never should have happened in our country. And I think that her approach to the Constitution is actually not a political one. And so this is a very important point. There's three main ways you can be a judge. You could be a strict constructionist, which almost no one is. That's Scalia kind of said that's silly. And then you could be an activist, or you can be a living Constitution type, which is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg was. That is what Justice Breyer is, Justice Kagan, and Justice Sotomayor. Or you can be a textualist, or you can be an originalist. So a strict constructionist, it takes the spirit of originalism way too far. It's like only what the words say literally. Okay, if you take that to its furthest possible extent, then it would say that only the First Amendment applies to mailing letters. Okay, we know that's not the spirit of the First Amendment. So what a textualist would say, which is what Scalia was, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, Amy Coney Barrett, and Clarence Thomas all are, is what is this philosophical spirit of the law when it was written in the times, and what were they trying to say about human nature and why? That's what a textualist is. They're not trying to read into the law. They're not trying to make law. And even when it comes to same-sex marriage, the U.S. Supreme Court upended many state mandates that said that marriage was between one man and one woman. If you wanted to get marriage equality in this country, then go do it through the legislative branch. The biggest corruption in the last 30 or 40 years, and we're finally fixing this problem thanks to our current president and his firm commitment to judges, is that the third branch of government, Article 3, it is not there for you to make America in your image. It's not. It's there to be a check and to be a sober, very deliberate branch of government that reads, is this constitutional? Comparing what was done to comparing what is legal, and that's it. It's not, and Sotomayor and Kagan do not believe that. They think that the third branch of government should be a branch of government to try to make social justice in the world or environmental justice. Basically, read into the law whatever you want it to. And I think, obviously, that's when you get into very, very big problems. And even Scalia said himself, Scalia said, there were so many decisions that I made that I knew would not have the best benefit or outcome for the country, but I knew it was still constitutional, so I made the decision anyway. That's a mark of a good judge. The mark of a good judge is someone who can admit, this is not going to be great for the country. I'll say that in my dissent or my support, but I'm going to rule correctly anyway, because it's not his job to call balls and strikes on what is best for the country, balls and strikes on what is constitutional. If you want to effectuate change, go win elections to the legislative branch. And so that's a great question. Thank you. Next question.
So you advocate for a wake-up call on limited government. How would you suggest that we go about accomplishing this? You gave a couple ideas like be bold or self-control. but what would be some more practical ways, and especially when it seems like our vote is going to be more just an option to strengthen government either way we vote?
Yeah, I mean, I can see the spirit of your question. I think that first and foremost, we have to become a lot more focused on local and state races. I think we have gotten away from the original composition of the United States government. Remember, the states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states. When you travel to Germany or France or Spain, they have no understanding whatsoever a lot of the times around states' rights. It's a highly centralized system. The idea of states' rights is a very, very important position on local governance and keeping and protecting individual rights. For example, if California wants to do wacko things and go bankrupt, whatever. If Wisconsin wants to fix their educational system and fix their pension system, which you did under Governor Walker, which resulted in phenomenal economic growth and a much more prosperous state, you guys should be richly rewarded for that, and you are. I'll take one exception, though. I can understand your perspective, though. I could see the spirit of your question where you say that both choices both want to expand government. I would say that the president running for re-election for what he wants to do with judges and what he's done with the 300 federal judges is the greatest firewall against a out-of-control administrative state and a over-bloated federal bureaucracy. Where the other side, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they would stand much more on pushing more power to the federal government and overly centralizing. Here's a great example. Here's the president respecting more of states' rights versus what Joe Biden wanted to do. Just pure facts here. President Trump rejected a national mask mandate. He said, let's leave it to the states. I agree with that. Joe Biden says, we want a national mask mandate. I think that's insane. I think that if South Dakota, Kristi Noem, if they want to handle the virus a certain way, they should be given the liberty to do that. And guess what? It actually worked really well for them. They have no structural state deficit. They have the lowest unemployment in the country. They're going to have positive GDP growth before any other state. They were able to have less deaths per capita than other comparable rural communities across the country. They found something that worked for them. Now, it's not saying that it's going to work in New York City or San Francisco, but they're completely different situations, and they should be. So I would just say that you already see one difference between states' rights and not states' rights there. So I'd push back a little bit against it. But I also think that, here's another thing, just so everyone understands, small government is really hard. Small government is hard to persuade people for, it's hard to live under, and it takes a lot of work and responsibility. It takes people that are willing to take responsibility for all of your actions. I'm afraid we're getting away from that in our country right now. I'm afraid that it's harder than ever for us to sell small government. I would love it. I'd love to be able to say, you know, we pay almost nothing in taxes, we do all this. Here's the problem, though, is that as certain people work harder, play by the rules, don't make destructive decisions, they're going to see their income and their wealth rise. They will. And then there will be people that make destructive decisions, that don't do those things. And then you see that inequality grow, which is inevitable when you have liberty. It's just going to happen. But then somebody comes in and they sow dissension and demagoguery when that inequality grows. Not say, how do we improve the condition of people that aren't yet at the top of the building and let's fix the elevator. Instead, it's like, let's go throw rocks at the top of the building, to use a metaphor. That's very, very dangerous, and I fear it's almost inevitable. I think it's becoming increasingly hard to sell the ideas of constitutionally limited government because we are programming a population and a citizenry to look towards the government as, wait, did I get mine? Did I get mine? Did I get my check in the mail? Did I get my subsidy? Did I get my preferential treatment? And while some of it might be very well-intentioned, some of it people might need it, not discounting it, but it creates a psychological demand that eventually will turn into an Olympic competition of who can get the most amount of stuff out of the United States Treasury. And that is not a way to govern a prosperous Western constitutional republic. So thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
All right.
Hello.
So, hello. I'm a big fan, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. So my question for you is, would you say is the biggest battle that conservatives are losing, and how should we fight it?
It's a phenomenal question. Thank you. So I would first and foremost, this is why I'm so happy to be at this school, because you guys actually invite me. It's amazing. Thank you. We're losing the educational battle nationwide. You guys might not feel it here. You guys might not see it here. But we are losing the educational battle nationwide. Young people are being taught secular nihilism. They are being taught they're not just that, they're not even being taught the classics, they're being taught that the classics were wrong, which is just so absurd. And we are really entering a phase where a lot of young people have graduated college with no moral understanding of how to interact with a very, very difficult world. So that's one thing that we're struggling with a lot. I would also think that conservatives, and I'm very guilty of this because my mind is not wired this way. I'm a logical, reason-based guy. We come across as not compassionate way too much. And I need to get better at that, right? And I'm kind of a type of guy where I'm like, well, just work harder, and that's just kind of how I'm wired. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm admitting a vulnerability here, but we as conservatives have to get a lot better at portraying compassion and telling better stories and emotion. Whereas the left, they're the best at this. If you had someone come up that's like my equivalent, it'd be the sob stories that would have me crying. Like, wow, okay, maybe everything is awful, right? And they're really good at it. Again, that if you govern that way, it's very dangerous, right? Because all of a sudden you're going to have personal testimonies governing your entire country, and it's just whoever has the saddest story ends up getting the most amount of votes. Really bad way to govern your country, right? Like, that's pathological in nature. Not discounting it, though. I'm not saying that personal stories should be kicked on the wayside. God gave us both a heart and a mind. The one thing, though, that you should govern in empiricism, because that's one thing that everyone can accept, right? That's why you should govern in data and moral truth. So I think we're losing that. I think that we come across as harsh and backwards looking, and I think that prejudice is incorrect, trust me. I think it's completely incorrect, and I'm happy to build out why I think that. And also, I think that we as conservatives need to make our opinions known more to people that we disagree with. I think that we self-censor far too often, myself included. You're like, what? You self-censor? Like, what are you talking about? No, that's true. There are times when I'm in Phoenix and I have my, Make America Great Again hat right next to me in my car, and I'm like, maybe I won't wear this into the grocery store because I don't want the fight, or I don't want the disagreement. I'm already self-selecting a conversation that has yet to happen because I think the other side's going to be nasty to me. And sometimes they are. Trust me, I have plenty of life experience to accompany this, okay? Like, a lot. But that's still not reason for me to shut myself up, right? And so I think that we have to be talking more as conservatives. I think that we should be more proud to kind of get the weird looks from friends like, what do you mean you're a conservative? Well, let me walk you through what exactly that means. And, we as conservatives believe that human beings and the state of nature are naturally flawed. We believe in original sin. That's a biblical idea. And that if you're going to form civil government, you're going to need some assurance that it's not going to turn into a kleptocracy or a dictatorship or a tyranny really quick. That's why we have checks and balances. That's why we have a bottom-up government, not a top-down government. Remember? People, local, state, federal. That's how our entire system was built, not top-down. And also, we as conservatives believe that natural rights must be preserved and protected. The right to speech, the right to assembly, the right to protection, the right to privacy. And those rights are not given to us by a government. They're given to us by God, and it's government's role to first not infringe on them, secondly, to protect them. That's kind of what a conservative believes. And I think that most people actually have never heard that before. I think most people think that we're like corporate saber rattlers, that we're just trying to have everyone go work for Amazon or something, which is actually the exact opposite of the truth, by the way. Like, we find rivers to go pollute or something. Like, I get these things all the time. They're like, why aren't you polluting a river right now? Like, I don't know. I do that on the weekends. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So, I mean, the point is that there's so many stereotypes and prejudices out there that are just completely untrue. And I think we should also have a lightheartedness to us. And I think that any time that we get into getting too angry or too mean or too combative, just take a step back. Bring down the temperature, and I pray that will allow us to win more arguments. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlie, for coming and speaking. I know you literally just talked about education just a little bit, but like with all these young people that are joining these socialist agendas and policies, I see it as a fault in our education system. I think you've probably even said it's more indoctrination than education. I think that's probably the biggest reason why you started Turning Point is because of this reason. And so I just wanted to ask if you could shed some more light with like the 1619 Project and other socialist agendas that are changing our history and other agendas in our education system, and why conservatives, or how conservatives can get in and start fighting back.
It's a phenomenal question. Thank you. And look, how you educate young people is one of the most important things you can do in a country, and it will best predict whether or not your civilization is able to continue. If you cannot replicate successful moral values to the next generation, the country will not exist. It's that simple. And so there's a growing movement right now that is trying to say that our country was actually founded in 1619, not in 1776. This is by a woman by the name of Nicole Hannah-Jones. I'm not spending too much time on it. There's a great piece by Brett Stevens, who got skewered for writing this piece, where he just deconstructed the 1619 project for exactly what it is, which is just a pile of garbage, okay? Our country had a unique philosophical founding in 1776. There were 3 pieces of literature that were written in 1776 that everyone needs to know about. Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, and of course, our birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence. Now, why was the Declaration so incredible? Well, first of all, it's the most uncertain document ever written in the history of the planet. It was our birth certificate, but it could have been our death certificate. So these guys literally wrote a declaration in big, bold font. 51 out of 55 were Bible-believing, regular church-attending Christians, where they said firmly, one of the course of human events, it becomes necessary to dissolve ties. They go on to say, the laws of nature and nature's God. Boom, that's the important part. Natural law. What is natural law? It is the merging of biblical Christianity with scientific empiricism, and saying that all the scientific discovery only reinforces that there's a God. Not rejecting Newtonian physics, not turning our back on Pascal, not turning our back on any of that, but saying the more we go into science, the more it actually confirms that there's a God. Remember, they did not say the laws of science and science's, dominion. They said the laws of nature and nature's God, that there's a natural law. And this is a very important point, that the Declaration was signed on objective, not subjective truth. It was not signed on postmodern nonsense. It wasn't signed on Herbert Marcuse's critical race theory, okay? It was signed in believing that there is a natural order and a natural law. If I drop this mic, it will fall. Force equals mass times acceleration. An object at rest will stay at rest. These things were just getting discovered right around the things that we take for granted, Newtonian physics, all these things were just coming at a rapid pace, and the founders then mixed reason and revelation into the greatest country ever to exist. So many young people are being taught the opposite. They look at specific pieces of injustice that did happen, and they put the entire narrative incorrectly, as not as a hero's journey to atone and to conquer and to overcome injustice, but instead they say we never actually overcame that injustice, we just camouflage it into something different. This is balderdash. It's nonsense. They say we're just as racist today as we were in the 1960s. You must go to a university, not this one, to believe something like that. Like, there's no way. You must go to UW-Madison. How about that, okay? I mean, to think that after we have the desegregation of sports, equal voting rights, the destruction of Jim Crow, twice electing a black president, 3 million black immigrants since the 1970s, 1 million from the Caribbean, 2 million from Africa have come to this country, that we've made no racial progress in this country, that is nonsense. And yet that's really what's taught. They're like, well, no, the tricksters, they just camouflaged it better. And the narrative that they're trying to create, which is hilarious because they don't believe in meta-narratives, but the narrative that they're trying to create is that this place is awful, let me just prove it to you, get angry, let's disintegrate it, and then give us all the power, and we're going to try to create something new. And it's very seductive, by the way. You know how my job would be so much easier if you just called me up here and I complained for 50 minutes about our country. Because you have things so good in our country that it's easier to be not thankful, but bitter. Gratitude takes effort. We know this. It's a biblical value. There's an intentionality about gratitude. Like, thank you, God, for giving us this space. Thank you, God, for giving us this gathering. You have to, being bitter and being almost just, not just arrogant and deceitful, but also just being full of ingratitude, that is sinful in nature, actually. Just saying, like, what is around us is terrible and awful. And I'm not saying we haven't made mistakes. Of course we have. But to say America as a country is a mistake is complete and total nonsense. That this country is the most benevolent, charitable, accepting, diverse country ever to exist in the history of the world. This country has done more good for the betterment of humanity than any other country ever to exist. And for the kingdom, too. Christianity exploded thanks to the United States of America, worldwide and domestically. And so I think a failure to recognize how amazing we have it, why this country was founded, and the hero's journey that we've been on, and that's really what it has been, which is the constant inward looking of how can we improve and how are we going to do that. For example, abolishing slavery. For example, women's suffrage, 13, 14, 15 Amendments, Civil Rights Act. And constantly that better pursuit of the good is something that I think that we take for granted in this country far too often. And so that's kind of why I speak all the time, do 2 podcasts a day, radio show, you name it, because I feel as if there is a lack of appreciation. And that's why I call, Christians and for, conservatives out there to be more firm and more focused on this. So thank you. I think I could take 1 or 2 more. So yeah.
By the way, awesome.
Thank you.
You're doing a great job. So question, real quick, how should Christians fight for equality for all races without aligning with the BLM movement? What's going on?
It's a great question. So equality is what you said, right? Or did you say equality or egalitarianism?
Equal.
Okay, no, that's
equal,
an important
Yep.
distinction because equity and equality are 2 completely different things. And the left argues a lot for equity. So there's a couple different types of equality, right? Equality under the law, equality of opportunity, and equality outcomes, right? So 3 different types of equality. So equality under the law is essential. So this is the Greek term, it's either eleutheria or isonomia. It's a biblical idea that all men are made in the image of God and that everyone should have the same exact treatment under the law, right? So you as a black American and myself as a white American, there's nothing that is illegal for me to do that you can't do or vice versa, right? That is trying to achieve equality under the law. That was not the case prior to the Civil Rights Act, right? So then equality of opportunity. So that's where all of a sudden it's admirable, difficult, but we must aim at that every single day. The best way to achieve equality of opportunity are 2 main things. Getting fathers back in the home in our country and getting our education system right. Those are the 2 things. Anyone that wants to talk about those 2 things, let's have a conversation. I don't care if you're the right or the left or in the middle. BLM doesn't want to talk about that. On their website, they say they want to destroy the Western prescribed nuclear family. 77% of blacks in this country are born without a stable father in the home. 77%. And they don't want to talk about school choice. They don't want to talk about charter schools. They don't want to talk about challenging the public sector teacher unions. They don't want to talk about firing bad teachers and paying better teachers more. They don't want to have a conversation around that. Instead, their sole focus is around the idea of systemic racism in our justice system and police brutality. So incredibly misleading when we dive into the data. I'm happy to do that, but it takes, I've done so many talks on that I could just basically say it's very, very misleading. But then there's equality outcomes. This is evil. No one should want this. No one. Because what that basically says is that your choices, your agency, your decisions, your sacrifices should not matter. So if somebody who works harder to get a good grade, someone who does not go drinking the night before a final should be treated the same as someone who does, that's nonsense. I believe in a meritocracy. I also believe in a civil society. We have a moral obligation to do a lot better with the equality of opportunity. But if we're honest about where does opportunity come from, we have destroyed the Western prescribed nuclear family in this country. Even in Christian homes, everybody, if you see a Christian wedding on Instagram, more likely that couple is going to be divorced than make it all throughout their life together. You guys see a lot of your friends getting married, right? Just statistically, more likely that they're going to get divorced. And some people have great reasons for it, and there are biblical reasons for divorce. There are. If there is infidelity, if there is abuse, I get it, with right pastoral counsel. However, no one should argue that 51% divorce is good for anyone. Broken homes, disjointed parenting, all those sorts of things. And so the family is the most tried and true and proven institution in the history of the planet. And I think we way overcomplicate some of these discussions. Why do you think all of a sudden that in Milwaukee, some of these neighborhoods have been filled with crime? You have fathers that are not present for young ladies to see what kind of man they want to marry and young men to see who they want to become. And then and single mothers are modern day heroes, but we put an unneeded and undue amount of stress financially, culturally, and otherwise on single mothers in this country. And so that's how it interfaces on that. Equality of law, essential and moral. Equality of opportunity, admirable, and we should focus on that. Equality of outcome, no way. That is a no-go zone, because that completely discounts sacrifices, choices, agency, and some people having really good ideas. If you're an entrepreneur and you come up with a really good idea, you should be able to succeed from that, right? If you come up with something that improves people's lives, you should have the capacity to then, I think, benefit from that. I hope that helps answer your question. And then I'll say one other thing on this, actually. You asked on the Christian side of it, right? So we as Christians should wholeheartedly reject any racial conversations where people all of a sudden start to make judgments and prejudices based on race. For example, you as a white person have privilege. No, that's not true. no person has any form of privilege just based on the melanin content in their skin. That's racist believing that. If you start organizing people based on their skin color, then all of a sudden you're getting into a racial conversation that will bring us prior to the 1960s. The American Trinity, there's a Christian Trinity, there's an American Trinity. It's in God we trust, e pluribus unum, and liberty. E pluribus unum is the Latin phrase, out of many one, that we are all one people. There is only one race, the human race. And I think the hyper-racialization of our country is going to be bad for everyone, because there is no pit. There is no bottom of that pit when you start digging that way. So thank you for your question. I appreciate it. Thank you. Last question?
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks again, Charlie, for coming out. Always great hearing from you speaking
Thank you.
and everything. I was just hoping, and I think it'll be a good question to end on, you could just describe, so we have 9 days until the upcoming election. You could describe the dichotomy of the fork in the road we're at in this necessary upcoming election, just what you see for the futures of America on both sides.
Yeah, and look, that's a great question. So since I was asked, I'm going to answer my own personal opinion on the election. So no, I get it. Trust me, I totally get it. So look, I am far from a neutral observer, like all things being equal. I'm a friend of the president. I've traveled with the president. I've got to know him, and he's definitely unique. He's definitely unique. He's got his own style. But if you would have told me 4 years ago when I was crisscrossing the country just trying to beat Hillary and get the president elected, that we'd have 3 Supreme Court justices that could then overturn Roe versus Wade, 300 federal judges, that he would speak at the March for Life, I'm like, what? He's 3 times married, twice divorced, cover of Playboy magazine, donated to Planned Parenthood, used to say nice things about Hillary Clinton, and he's the first president to speak at March for Life? Something's different here. He slashes funding to Planned Parenthood. What? He moves the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizes Golan Heights, and then repeals the Iran deal? He negotiates peace between Israel, UAE, Sudan, and Bahrain? Style that kind of makes some of us go, I don't quite get it, but the results are pretty incredible. Before the shutdown, the greatest economy in U.S. history. Lowest ever black unemployment, Latino unemployment, Asian American unemployment. Young people had more jobs open than jobs to fill. Shut down our country. Now you got a choice if you want to go back to that or you want to go a direction that I don't really know where we want to go economically. A president that's unafraid to say that, sign executive orders around religious liberty, the most pro-Israel president in American history, as I've mentioned. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a fork in the road. And let's talk about the issue of life. The issue of life, I think, is a complete non-compromising position. I think that all human beings deserve equal constitutional rights and protections, that they're made in the image of God, and 1 million abortions every single year is a moral outrage. Right. So the president, albeit his style that makes people go whatever and all that, he's gone out of his way to be far more pro-life than Republican Christian presidents that predated him, including George W. Bush. Right. Joe Biden wants to increase the Planned Parenthood funding that is coming from the public trough. He wants to continue the pandering to the pro-abortion forces, where President Trump has put Amy Coney Barrett, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, where maybe we can get Roe versus Wade repealed in our lifetime. And so, yeah, it's a fork in the road. It's also a question, just more philosophically, of do you want a country that believes firmly in the ideas of e pluribus unum, liberty, and in God we trust, where you look at people based on their values and their character, not on their skin color? Or the opposition that panders to insurrectionist, destructive forces? Just go to Kenosha. You guys can drive down the street and see exactly what that materializes. And quite honestly, people that want to make America an image that we do not want to go. And don't forget, if some of you are struggling, like, I just can't vote for Trump because of this and this, then go vote for Pence. Go do that. He's a Bible-believing, loyally married Christian who loves the Lord. And you guys might not know this, but Pence prays over the president every single day. He has Bible studies. I've been on Air Force 2 with the vice president. He has the Word of God open. He's praying over our government. He's praying over senators. There's been more pastors invited to the Oval Office, to this presidency, from what I've been told, than any other president since Ronald Reagan. And I believe that if we look at the biblical stories of Samson and David, God uses all sorts of different people to advance his kingdom. The story of Samson, I can't give that story to a Sunday school. God came to Samson when he was in a prostitute's bed twice. Then he's like, go get the jaw of a donkey and go kill 1,000 Philistines and go die a sacrificial death. So it's like R-rated for younger audiences, yet he made it into the Hall of Faith in Hebrews for a reason. Because Paul saw something in Samson's commitment to what God told him to do, and God was after his heart. And so I believe firmly that we as Christians are called to be in civic government. I told you the examples of Daniel and Joseph and Nehemiah and Jeremiah and Mordecai and Esther, and that's not an exhaustive list. And so we have a choice. I think every Christian should vote. I think you should vote not your values. People say, go vote your values. That's a bad idea. Go vote biblical values. Go vote for the person who's going to stand with Israel, stand for life, stand for the rule of law, stand for good judges, and in my personal opinion, that's President Donald Trump. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate having the opportunity to have everybody here today. Thank you. You are dismissed.